A group of friends decided to go camping in a remote forest for a weekend getaway. They packed their tents, food, and everything they needed for a few days in the wilderness. Excited for the adventure, they set out on a Friday afternoon, hoping for a fun and relaxing time away from the hustle and bustle of city life. After hiking for several hours, they found the perfect spot to set up camp. It was a clearing surrounded by tall trees with a small stream nearby. They pitched their tents, started a campfire, and spent the evening roasting marshmallows, telling jokes, and sharing stories. As the night grew darker, the forest around them became eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves and distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence. Around midnight, one of the campers, Mark, announced that he needed to use the bathroom. He grabbed a flashlight and headed into the woods, assuring his friends that he would be back soon. The others continued chatting and laughing, not thinking much of it. However, as minutes turned into an hour, they began to worry. Mark had not returned, and their calls for him went unanswered. Concerned, the group grabbed their flashlights and split up to search for their friend. They scoured the surrounding area, calling out Mark's name and checking every possible hiding spot. Despite their efforts, there was no sign of him. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Frustration and fear began to set in as the reality of the situation dawned on them. The friends decided to contact the authorities. The nearest ranger station was several miles away, and with no cell phone reception, they had to hike there to report the incident. A search and rescue team was dispatched immediately. For the next few days, the team combed through the forest, using dogs, drones, and even helicopters in their efforts to find Mark. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. Mark's belongings were found scattered throughout the forest, but there was no trace of him. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, nothing. The mystery deepened when the search team discovered an old, abandoned cabin hidden deep in the woods. Inside, they found strange symbols carved into the walls and remnants of what seemed like ancient rituals. Despite thorough investigations, no concrete evidence linking the cabin to Mark's disappearance was found. The story of the vanishing camper became a local legend, with many theories but no solid answers. Some believed that Mark had fallen victim to wild animals, while others speculated that he had stumbled upon something sinister and supernatural. The forest, once a place of adventure and fun, now carried an aura of fear and mystery. Years passed, and Mark's disappearance remained unsolved. His friends, haunted by the memories of that night, never went camping again. The forest where they had last seen Mark became known as the Vanishing Woods, a place where people went missing without a trace. To this day, campers and hikers who venture into those woods are reminded of the eerie tale of Mark, the camper who vanished without a trace. A family of 4 decided to go on a camping trip to bond and escape the stress of everyday life. They chose a secluded campsite near a beautiful, serene lake, far from any signs of civilization. The father, John, the mother, Sarah, and their 2 children, Emily and Jake, were looking forward to a peaceful weekend surrounded by nature. They arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, set up their tents, and prepared a campfire. The lake was calm, and the setting sun cast a warm, golden glow over the water. After a hearty meal, they sat around the fire, sharing stories and enjoying the tranquility of their surroundings. As night fell, the forest around them grew dark and silent, with only the crackling of the fire and the occasional chirp of crickets breaking the stillness. Around midnight, Sarah thought she saw something moving in the shadows beyond the firelight. She dismissed it as her imagination and tried to focus on the stories John was telling the children. However, the feeling of being watched persisted, and she couldn't shake off the unease. Eventually, they all retired to their tents, hoping to get a good night's sleep. In the middle of the night, Sarah was awakened by a strange sound. It was a soft, whispering voice, almost inaudible, coming from the direction of the lake. She sat up, straining to hear more clearly. The voice grew louder, but she couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a woman calling for help. Sarah nudged John awake and told him what she had heard. He reassured her that it was probably just the wind or an animal, and urged her to go back to sleep. The next morning, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She decided to explore the area around the lake, while the rest of the family prepared breakfast. As she walked along the shoreline, she noticed a series of strange footprints leading from the water into the forest. They were small, like a woman's, and they seemed to appear out of nowhere. Intrigued and a bit frightened, she followed the footprints into the woods. The trail led her to a clearing where she found an old, weathered photograph lying on the ground. It was a picture of a woman in her 20s, smiling at the camera. The photograph looked out of place, as if it had been there for a long time. As Sarah examined it, she felt a cold chill run down her spine. She decided to head back to the campsite and show the photograph to John. When Sarah returned, she found the campsite in disarray. The tents were torn, and their belongings were scattered everywhere. Emily and Jake were nowhere to be found. Panic set in as Sarah and John searched frantically for their children. They called out their names, but there was no response. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Desperate, Sarah showed John the photograph she had found. John's face turned pale as he recognized the woman in the picture. She was a local legend, known as the Woman in the Woods. According to the story, she had drowned in the lake many years ago, and her spirit was said to haunt the area, luring unsuspecting campers to their doom. Terrified, Sarah and John continued their search, but it was in vain. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of Emily and Jake. The authorities conducted a thorough investigation but found no clues. The only evidence was the photograph, which remained a haunting reminder of that fateful night. The story of the woman in the woods became a chilling tale told around campfires, a warning to those who dared to camp near the lake. Sarah and John, devastated by the loss of their children, moved away and never returned to the area. The campsite was abandoned, left to the spirits and the memories of those who had disappeared there. A young couple, Jenny and Tom, decided to spend a romantic weekend camping in a national park known for its scenic beauty and serene environment. They were both nature enthusiasts and loved the idea of spending a few days away from the city, surrounded by the tranquility of the forest. They arrived at their chosen campsite in the late afternoon, set up their tent, and prepared a small campfire. The site was nestled in a valley, with towering trees providing a natural canopy. As night fell, the couple sat by the fire, enjoying the peaceful sounds of the forest and the twinkling stars overhead. After a while, Jenny noticed a series of lights in the distance, flickering between the trees. At first, she thought it was other campers, but the lights seemed to move erratically, weaving in and out of the forest. Intrigued, she pointed them out to Tom, who was equally puzzled. The lights were unlike anything they had seen before, bright yet elusive and moving in patterns that defied explanation. As the night wore on, the lights continued to appear, drawing closer to their campsite. Tom decided to investigate, thinking it might be some sort of natural phenomenon or perhaps other campers playing a prank. He grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the woods, with Jenny reluctantly following behind. The further they walked, the more disoriented they became. The lights seemed to lead them deeper into the forest, away from their campsite. Despite their best efforts to follow the lights, they could never quite catch up to them. It was as if the lights were intentionally keeping a distance, luring them further away from safety. After what felt like hours, the couple realized they were lost. The lights had disappeared, leaving them alone in the dark, dense forest. Panic set in as they tried to find their way back to the campsite. Every direction looked the same, and the familiar landmarks they had noted earlier were nowhere to be found. As they stumbled through the forest, they began to hear strange noises, whispers and rustling sounds that seemed to come from all around them. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and Jenny clung to Tom, terrified. The forest, once a place of beauty and calm, had turned into a nightmarish labyrinth. In their desperate search for a way out, they stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, with broken windows and overgrown vines covering its walls. Despite their fear, they decided to take refuge inside, hoping to wait until daylight to find their way back. Inside the cabin, they found old furniture, cobwebs, and dusty relics from a bygone era. As they explored the interior, they discovered an old map pinned to the wall, It seemed to be a map of the forest, marked with various trails and landmarks. Desperate for any clue that might help them escape, Tom studied the map carefully. As he traced the paths with his finger, he noticed a series of markings that matched the location of the mysterious lights they had seen. The map indicated that these lights were associated with a local legend about will-o'-the-wisps, ghostly lights said to lead travelers astray. Suddenly, the lights reappeared outside the cabin, glowing brightly in the darkness. Jenny and Tom watched in horror as the lights surrounded the cabin, flickering and dancing just beyond the windows. The whispers grew louder, and the air inside the cabin felt thick with an oppressive presence. Determined not to fall victim to the ghostly lights, Tom and Jenny decided to stay inside the cabin until dawn. They huddled together, trying to ignore the eerie sounds and the unsettling feeling of being watched. As the hours passed, the lights slowly faded away, and the forest grew silent once more. When the first light of dawn broke, they cautiously stepped outside the cabin. The forest looked less menacing in the daylight, and they could finally make out a path that led back to their campsite. Exhausted but relieved, they followed the trail, eventually finding their way back to their tent. They quickly packed up their belongings and left the forest, vowing never to return. The experience had shaken them deeply, and they couldn't forget the haunting lights and the terrifying night they had spent in the woods. Back home, they researched the legend of the will-o'-the-wisps and discovered that many other campers had reported similar experiences. The national park was known for its mysterious lights, which were believed to be spirits of the lost, leading travelers astray. The story of Jenny and Tom's encounter with the disappearing lights became a cautionary tale for other campers. The forest, with its beautiful scenery and serene environment, held a dark secret that only the bravest or the most foolish dared to uncover. The lights, whether a natural phenomenon or something supernatural, remained a mystery, their true nature known only to those who had faced them and lived to tell the tale. A group of 6 friends, all avid campers, decided to spend a weekend in a remote part of the forest they had never explored before. They had heard rumors of an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods, and their curiosity got the better of them. Excited for an adventure, they packed their gear and set off early on a Friday morning. The hike to the cabin was long and challenging, but the friends were in high spirits. They joked and laughed as they trekked through the dense forest, following a faint trail that led them deeper into the wilderness. As the sun began to set, they finally caught sight of the cabin. It was a weathered 2-story structure, hidden among the trees, with a sense of eerie isolation. Despite its dilapidated appearance, the cabin seemed sturdy enough to provide shelter for the night. The friends decided to make it their base camp, planning to explore the surrounding area the next day. They unpacked their gear, started a fire in the old fireplace, and settled in for the night. The cabin's interior was musty and filled with old, forgotten items, rusty tools, broken furniture, and faded photographs. As they sat around the fire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, they began to feel an unsettling presence. The temperature inside the cabin dropped noticeably, and strange noises echoed through the halls. At first, they dismissed it as the creaking of an old building, but the sounds grew louder and more distinct. Footsteps, whispers, and the faint sound of music. One of the friends, Sarah, decided to explore the upper floor, hoping to find the source of the noises. She climbed the creaky stairs and wandered down a narrow hallway lined with dusty portraits. As she reached the end of the hall, she noticed a door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she found herself in a small bedroom with a single, ancient bed and a large, cracked mirror on the wall. As she approached the mirror, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Reflected in the glass was the figure of a woman, dressed in a long, white gown, standing behind her. The woman's eyes were hollow, and her face was twisted in a silent scream. Sarah spun around, but the room was empty. The figure had vanished. Terrified, Sarah rushed back downstairs and told her friends what she had seen. They were skeptical at first, thinking she had imagined it, but the growing sense of dread and the persistent noises convinced them that something was not right. They decided to leave the cabin immediately, despite the late hour and the darkness outside. As they packed their belongings, The haunting noises intensified. The whispers became louder, and the footsteps seemed to be coming from all directions. The friends felt an overwhelming sense of urgency to escape. Just as they were about to step outside, the front door slammed shut on its own, trapping them inside. Panic set in as they tried to pry the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The air inside the cabin grew thick and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, the fireplace roared to life, and the flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the walls. The friends huddled together, unsure of what to do. In the midst of the chaos, one of them, James, remembered an old legend about the cabin. It was said to be haunted by the spirit of a woman who had died there under mysterious circumstances. According to the tale, she was waiting for someone to help her find peace. Desperate to escape, James shouted into the darkness, promising to help the spirit if she would let them go. The room fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly. The front door slowly creaked open, and the friends wasted no time in fleeing the cabin. They ran through the forest, not stopping until they were far away from the cursed place. When they finally reached the safety of their campsite, they collapsed in exhaustion. Over the next few days, they researched the history of the cabin and discovered that it had belonged to a woman named Eleanor, who had lived there alone and was rumored to have been a witch. She had died under mysterious circumstances, and her spirit was said to haunt the cabin, searching for someone to release her from her torment. The friends shared their story with the local authorities and historians, who confirmed the legend. The cabin was eventually sealed off, marked as a dangerous and haunted place. The tale of the haunted cabin spread, becoming a chilling warning to those who dared to venture into the remote parts of the forest. For the 6 friends, the experience left a lasting impression. They never went camping again, and the memory of that night haunted them for years to come. The haunted cabin remained a mysterious and eerie landmark, a reminder of the supernatural forces that lurked in the shadows of the forest. A solo camper named Alex decided to spend a week in the wilderness to clear his mind and enjoy the solitude of nature. He chose a remote campsite by a crystal-clear lake, surrounded by dense forest. The area was known for its beauty and tranquility, and Alex was looking forward to a peaceful escape from his hectic life. Alex arrived at the campsite in the early afternoon, set up his tent, and began to explore the area. The lake was pristine, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. As the sun began to set, Alex started a campfire and cooked a simple meal. The night was calm, with a gentle breeze and the occasional splash of fish in the lake. As he sat by the fire, Alex noticed a faint light in the distance, on the opposite side of the lake. It looked like another campfire, flickering softly in the darkness. He was surprised, as he hadn't seen any other campers in the area. Curious, he decided to investigate the next day. The following morning, Alex packed a small bag with essentials and set out to find the source of the light. He hiked around the lake, enjoying the scenic views and the fresh air. As he approached the area where he had seen the light, he found an old, overgrown trail leading into the forest. Following the trail, Alex eventually stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. There was a decaying tent, a rusted camping stove, and scattered belongings covered in dirt and leaves. It looked as if no one had been there for years. Among the debris, he found a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. The journal belonged to a camper named Thomas, who had written about his solo camping trip several years earlier. The entries started off normal, describing his hikes and fishing trips, but soon took a darker turn. Thomas wrote about feeling watched, hearing strange noises at night, and seeing mysterious lights in the forest. One entry, dated August 22nd, stood out. "Last night I saw a light across the lake, just like the first night I arrived. I decided to investigate, but found nothing but an empty forest. When I returned to my campsite, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I think something is following me, watching me from the shadows. I don't know how much longer I can stay here." The entries ended abruptly, with no explanation of what had happened to Thomas. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He quickly left the abandoned campsite and returned to his own, feeling uneasy. That night, as he sat by his campfire, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Just as he was about to retire to his tent, he saw the light again, flickering in the same spot across the lake. This time, it seemed closer, almost beckoning him to come closer. Remembering Thomas's journal, Alex decided against investigating further. He extinguished his fire and retreated to his tent, hoping to ignore the eerie presence. Throughout the night, he heard footsteps circling his tent, soft whispers, and the occasional rustling of leaves. The light outside his tent glowed faintly, casting an eerie shadow through the fabric. Despite his fear, Alex stayed inside, hoping that whatever was out there would leave him alone. In the morning, the light was gone and the forest was quiet again. Alex decided to pack up and leave the campsite, feeling that his peaceful retreat had been tainted by the unsettling events. As he hiked back to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Once he reached safety, Alex reported his experience to the park rangers. They listened to his story with a mix of skepticism and concern, acknowledging that others had reported similar encounters over the years. The rangers searched the area, but found no trace of the phantom camper or any signs of recent activity at the abandoned campsite. Alex never returned to that forest. The experience left him with a deep sense of unease and a belief in the supernatural. The story of the phantom camper became another legend, a warning to those who ventured into the remote parts of the wilderness alone. The forest, with its beautiful lake and serene environment, held a dark secret that only a few had encountered. The light across the lake, whether a restless spirit or an unexplained phenomenon, remained a mystery, haunting the memories of those who had seen it and lived to tell the tale.